Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 9th of November 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, is Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to be joined today by Alex Thompson with Eastern Approaches, and of course, Alex reporting from the depths of the Netherlands. It's looking very pretty outside. We've still got some autumn leaves, Mike, and the sun is just about coming through, but it's not looking so pretty elsewhere.
Indeed. So Priti Patel has resigned, as we believed she would. Well, Theresa May has to find a replacement. International Development Secretary in charge of what? Giving money to terrorists, perhaps? So she has admitted in her resignation letter, which is on screen at the moment, that her actions lacked transparency. She said, "While my actions were meant with the best of intentions, my actions also fell below the standards of transparency and openness that I have promoted and advocated." Well, Theresa May replied also in a letter, and she said, "As you know, the UK and Israel are close allies, and it is right that we should work closely together, but that must be done formally and through official channels. That's why when we met on Monday, I was glad to accept your apology, and I welcomed your clarification about your trip to Israel over the summer. Now that further details have come to light, it is right that you've decided to resign." Various people suggesting that Theresa May should replace Priti Patel with an MP who voted for Brexit. The Times has reported that the EU are preparing for the possible collapse of Theresa May's government before Christmas, and either a change of leadership or elections leading to potentially a Labour victory. The front-runner is being reported to replace her, is being reported as Penny Mordaunt. So, Alex, is this a case of an overseas development minister gone native, and if so, was she doing this her own? Do you think on her own, or was she in cahoots with Boris?
Oh, I think the latter, Mike. I think she was in cahoots with Boris. One of my oldest friends suggested yesterday that Ms. Patel was doing this behind Mr. Johnson's back, and perhaps tasked by Mrs. May, but I don't think the control lines run that way. I've never seen pronounced evidence that Mrs. May has been in the Zionists' pocket in the way that her predecessors have been. That's not to say that she's clean hands, but she's much more a victim of events and carried about by diverse winds of funding, shall we say, than her predecessors who had their unshakable loyalty to Israel. Now, I think especially we have to get a bit realistic about the ethnicities as well here. Priti Patel represents the best of, well, not the best morally, but the most promising of British Indian money. And she has no particular axe to grind in the Middle East peace process or anything pro-Israel by default, unless it's a shared loathing of Islam, perhaps, but that's in the background. So I think this is a clear-cut case of, some are saying actually it's Mark Regev, the former ambassador in London. But anyway, some Israelis handling her, as they do a lot of other people, and co-opting her into the Zionist project and sucking in streams of British and, as they have done, American money in the past. So I think Priti Patel is an actor in the network here, not one of the cleverest. We've often pointed out that she's very concentrated on her appearance. And if you look at LBC, Mr. Farage last night, I do respect his analysis, even if I'm disappointed by some of his policy positions. Mr. Farage was making quite clear there, together with his in-studio guests and his callers who had it nailed, I think, that Miss Patel was never particularly the sharpest tool in the box. And I think she was caught out. She broke the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get found out. There are others in the network, including the old-fashioned Cecil Rhodes type public school boys, who are similarly in cahoots with Zionist aims. Of the worst kind, occupation of territory which is illegal under international law. So it's clear that there is a network. Priti Patel is one of the junior victims, but in turn she was being used to slosh British, American, European money into the conflict belts of the world, the Sahel in particular, the drought areas, to raise disgruntlement and slosh those disaffected people towards Europe, ultimately in the aim of communization is what's going on. She is one of the junior players, and she's got found out.
Right, Brian has something to ask here, but I was just interested to get your opinion of the Jewish Chronicle article that I highlighted yesterday, where they were suggesting that actually Theresa May had known about all these visits all along, and there was a bit of shenanigans going on to try to avoid, quotes, embarrassing the Foreign Office.
Well, again, I would point to Nigel Farage's analysis on LBC last night, again, prompted by his very clued up callers. The Jewish Chronicle does not represent Zionism. It represents the full spectrum of British Judaism, from apolitical, a-religious, right through to quite determined Marxists, but also conservatives. And Stephen Pollard is one of their finest journalists. He's got a very credible reputation. He's careful with his sourcing, and he's going to stand his ground on this. Number 10 immediately went into hunkering down mode and tried to fire salvos at him when he made these claims yesterday. The old saying is, of course, you don't get flack until you're over the target. I do think that Mr. Pollard has got credible sources for asserting that Number 10 knew this was going on.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring in Conservative Friends of Israel, because it seems to me that this is a pernicious organisation. It boasts of having influence over, I think my figure of 80% is correct, it boasts that it has influence of over 80% of British MPs. So we have an organisation which is targeting very, very cleverly lot of soft sell of all matters to do with Israel. It's right in the heart of the British government. We, as I'll say, ordinary voters, don't really know which ones are involved or not, although it's an open secret, or it's open. You can find the information, but we don't see it. And then in parallel with that organisation, we have vast amounts of Jewish money which is coming into the Tory party and into Westminster. So could it be that Priti Patel was actually partly brought down because she didn't understand the power of Conservative Friends of Israel?
That is a fair judgment, Brian. I mean, I've got high esteem for British Asians and indeed for British Jews and for their fantastic contributions, particularly to our economic life, but also our moral life. And what you do tend to find, though, is that certain of the elite subcontinental immigrant groups, the highest of the Hindus, the Gujaratis, for example, they do tend to get their fingers burnt when they get involved in the real shenanigans, the kind of things Gordon Bowden talks about, the old Cecil Rhodes line, Lord Milner line of Lonhro type capitalism, what Edward Heath called the unacceptable fate of capitalism, and he was at least right about that much, despite his other crimes. That interplay with Israel, Zionism, Rothschild is really, not a game to play unless you're a big boy, and it often ends in tears, well, and worse than tears for all involved. So I think it's quite feasible that Priti Patel, as a bright young thing, not a thicko, but certainly a bit of, in intellectual terms, a bit of an airhead, self-regarding, and like a lot of the British Asians, a bit arriviste, a bit sort of look at me, I've suddenly succeeded. I think she's, like a lot of her ilk, as you say, Brian, not really understood the depth of the power play involved, and particularly how many of the British establishment Tory grandees are in bed with this agenda and perhaps dominating Zionism rather than being dominated by it, I'm increasingly realising.
I thought it was interesting that BICOM were tweeting this out today. This is their article that they published yesterday on the Knesset marking the centenary of the Balfour Declaration. But they chose to promote that article like this. And I don't know what you read into this, Alex, but I just found it a bit strange that, promoting an article on the Knesset marking the Balfour Declaration centenary, they've got an image of Priti Patel.
It is a bit odd, isn't it? I think the large number of Israelis and Jews in diaspora who are not Zionist have always looked back to the Balfour Declaration with fondness because of its original intent, which was that there would be a two-state solution, to use the 21st century terminology, that there would be a Jewish state in Palestine, Theodor Herzl's Judenstaat, as he wrote about in 1895, which would not infringe the existence of the Palestinians. So you can see that there's competing visions of what Israel is in here. We've always got to be avoid simplicity in this. The majority demographically of Israel today is non-Zionist and does look to this model of Israel being a blessing to the nations, the old Jewish idea of tikkun olam, which that is still squaring up to the old Zionism, the really nasty Marxist kind, which came to Palestine, particularly after the Second World War, which Britain held back and fought a bloody rearguard action against with a loss of a lot of servicemen. This is forgotten now, but that's what Montgomery and others were warning about after the war. That line, that vision of rose-tinted spectacles view of Israel is a reality for some Jews, particularly in diaspora, and I think that's what the that they see in the Balfour Declaration is that there would be a state doing good in the world and mopping up the pieces of the Middle East conflict, as it were, among the Arabs. But yeah, fair enough. It's not what the Israeli state does. I mean, the hospitals in the Golan Heights, which Mrs. Patel was visiting illegally under international law and under cabinet policy unlawfully, and which she was hoping to slosh British money into. Those hospitals, yes, you can say, if you believe that the Syrian government is the wicked Assad regime, then you can say Israel was doing some humanitarian good there in the original Zionist vision. But in reality, of course, they were treating combatants against the legitimate forces of Syria and sending them back in, including apparently quite a lot of ISIS men. So that is the hard-nosed reality of what's going on. Ultimately, this will be resolved internally among the Jewish world in Israel and in diaspora as they wrestle for these competing visions of what Israel is.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that, Alex. Now let's move on to Donald Trump's visit to China. He's in China. He was in China yesterday, and continued stable development of China-US economic ties will be a major contributor to global growth. That was the message of Xi Jinping. China is willing to work together with the United States to respect each other, seek mutual benefit and reciprocity, focus on cooperation and manage and control differences. There can be no more important subjects than US-China relations, is what Donald Trump said. We have a capacity to solve the world's problems for many years to come. Trump, of course, put pressure on over North Korea. He said China can fix this problem quite quickly and easily. Xi said that the Chinese economy would become increasingly open and transparent to foreign firms. And so in the spirit of that, General Electric has done something like $3.5 billion in deals on the sides for aviation and engine parts for Chinese aviation companies. So it went on, but what was the reaction from others? Well, the Pentagon immediately decided that they would have a rare, what's being described in the India Express here as a rare 3-aircraft carrier drill in November, starting next week in the South China Sea. So we see more evidence of the sort of splits within the Trump administration. Reuters here, forbidden in China, but Trump skirts Great Firewall to tweet about Beijing trip. So they're making a huge deal of the fact that some tweets appeared on Trump's Twitter account while he was in China, despite the fact that Twitter is completely blocked in China. They're asking, how did he do that? We got The Independent. Trump in China, US president first in decades not to take reporter questions at Xi Jinping news briefing. So he refused to take questions from the media, quite correctly, probably. So he is there doing whatever he's doing, but the Western media and the continuing hysteria over the potential of China and the US sort of doing some kind of deal here. The Western elite's clearly not terribly happy about that, and they're probably going to be equally unhappy about the fact that Trump and Putin are to meet tomorrow. So, Alex, any thoughts?
Quite a few, Mike, but I'll try to keep it simple. It's very top-level stuff. If you follow the best analysis on X22 report, SGT report, and all the cryptocurrency sites, you have to take it with a pinch of salt because it goes into all kinds of areas. But one message is very clear, and this has been also analysed on the Sunday Wire with Patrick Henningsen and yourself and Vanessa Beeley on 21stcenturywire.com last Sunday. It's all pointing one way. Everyone's known for a long time that the dollarized economy is a busted flush. There have been several stages of it since Bretton Woods in 1946, particularly the switch to the oil-backed dollar and the petrodollar in 72 onwards. The gold was then hollowed out and flogged away. It's no longer there. China has been quietly preparing by amassing many kilotons of gold, including kilotons which ought to be, if you do the maths, in the Federal Reserve, some of which is European gold that the Americans were holding in safekeeping, been flogged off. So there's enough precious metal now, and there's 4 precious metals in the basket: gold, silver, platinum, and one I've forgotten, ought to be with P. But there's enough backing there for a gold-backed yuan now. In fact, it will be a pan-Eurasian currency, and this will be the mainstay of what Lyndon LaRouche has been pleading for a long time in the United States and has been persecuted for. It's a productive, infrastructure-based economy, and it's going to encompass the whole of Eurasia, the Arab world. Iran is going to slot into it. And so the Anglo and Israeli clients in the region, including Saudi Arabia, are really seeing the writing on the wall and going begging to Putin now for some kind of prop up, because they're going to lose the funding, which for some of these countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia is crucial to stop them the governments being removed by their own people who are so unhappy at the tyrannies that have been inflicted upon them. So a complicated picture, but the gold-backed yuan and the Chinese one belt, one road idea is being rolled out. Africa's for it, the Middle East is for it, Russia is, although wary of the yellow peril as it always has decided to go with that. And crucially, continental Europe, the Germanic countries and even France are starting to fall in line and accept that the Chinese will dominate the port and infrastructure and railway, and that there will be a more productive system for them there than in the Anglo-Zionist banking setup. That's all a done deal. So the House of Saud is shuffling to try to align itself with that in a vain attempt to cling on to power. The same kind of desperation is seen in Tel Aviv and in client states around the Middle East. It's kind of an end game. And I'm not a currency analyst, but I think that we're going to see a collapse of the dollar very, very soon. And I don't think that Europe, particularly here in continental Europe, will be very badly affected. There may be a short, sharp shock, but I think that the economy will get back on its feet, and we will no longer have a dollar-dominated system, which will be a big problem for the City of London as well, of course.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to be talking about a little bit about war issues later on, but I mean, what do you think the Western traditional global elites think are going to do about this?
Well, they're going to have to find some morality. We've done our best to rewrite our own history and consciousness of who we are. National sentiment is derided as nationalism and fascism, but we're going to have people back in power, in office, who understand the traditional sentiments of our people. If we don't know what our narrative is, then we're going to be dominated by others. I see I'm getting the usual flack in the chat room for not being anti-Semitic enough. Yes, there are Jews who control nasty things in the world. This has been well analysed by men like Kevin MacDonald in a scholarly trilogy, but it's an internal Jewish moral issue. Jews are also a big part of the moral solution in the world. You know, so the same applies to the Gentile Western nations and governments. They've gone right into evil. A lot of them are involved in satanic manipulation, not least on the economic plane, where everything's being stolen from us and there's no actual productivity. This is being put right now. It's to our shame that it's being done by Asian nations and not by the West. But there are promising elites in the West, particularly the people around Steve Bannon in the United States, who have long been aficionados of this productive model. You can give it other names, Platonic or Prussian or whatever, but at least the people actually get to participate in production in this system. It'll be derided as nationalism or worse, but I think it's the only way we're actually going to get back on our feet again.
Okay, thanks for that, Alex.
Well, if Trump is up front doing his politics, there's stuff manoeuvring behind him. And I'd like to thank one of our viewers, John, very much for sending in this one from the Chicago Defender. Basically, a big event all around Obama and the Obama Foundation. So here's the headline. The Foundation Summit brings together the next generation of leaders. I'm always fascinated when I see that word. Who are these leaders? Well, just have a look at this bit. Bringing together a collage of leaders of non-profit organisations, community and cultural stakeholders from around the globe, the Foundation kicked off its first global summit at the newly opened McCormick Place Marriott Marquis last week. So who are these wonderful people and what were they actually up to, all in the name of Obama? Well, it got interesting pretty quickly because we had this insert, a photograph. Melody Hobson moderates the discussion with Prince Harry. There's Prince Harry. And what was going on? Well, the highlights of the summit included an in-depth discussion with Prince Harry. They were joined by Chantel Stefanovic, a project coordinator for Full Effect, a programme of the Royal Foundation of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and Prince Harry, based in St Anne's, Nottingham. So fascinating. We've got Obama in the background, Mike, politicking. We've got the British royal family coming in. Well, who else was involved? Well, we thought we'd just have a little look at Melody. And here she is, tied in with Ariel Investments. And where does it get interesting? Well, if we have a look at some of her, just have to call this up on the other screen, my eyesight failing a bit here. Melody is a director of Estee Lauder Companies Incorporated and Starbucks. So we've got some pretty big corporate interests in the background of this Obama event, but it's all to do with communities and helping people on the streets. This is Mr. John Rogers, so he's the chairman of Ariel. And who's he involved in? Well, we see there that he's tied in with McDonald's and also a company called Exelon, which is a big energy provider in the States. So a remarkable mix of people. And we've got the British royal family working with Obama in the background to do what? Well, luckily, Harry was going to tell us, because we're going to change the world, apparently. This is part of his statement. He talked to the pupils at a local Chicago school about how young people can use their voices to change the world. But he also spoke about his Heads Together mental health campaign, which is led by the Royal Foundation in partnership with no less than 8 mental health charities. So we're going to change the world, but we've got a bit of a problem with mental health. And he went on to say this. He believed that everybody in the UK was ready for that discussion. That's about mental health. Everybody started to realise, not only do I know people who might have suffered, I might have suffered as well. Then you realise more people might have suffered a mental health issue than haven't. So correct me if I'm wrong here, gentlemen, but what I think I'm picking up is that Prince Harry is suggesting that actually more people are now mentally ill than are well.
Yes, that seems to be what he's saying.
Seems to be what he's saying. But not to worry, because these people are going to reorder society. And it's fascinating that all this is based in Chicago, because, of course, Chicago is the home of our subversive change agent, Saul Alinsky. Now, remember that Saul Alinsky was acknowledged as being the source behind the Tory party's Big Society, which David Cameron announced. And then Theresa May continued this by saying we were going to have a shared society, but clearly she was talking about the same thing. Barack Obama, a student and admirer of Saul Alinsky, and now we've got the British royal family tied in with this. So I'm just going to say we've got different names, but we seem to have the same path to a dictatorship. As far as I'm concerned, Alex, this is subversion. It's being done with a coat that looks very smart, so people are not really paying attention. But underneath the surface, this is raw subversion. We are going to change our existing institutions by stealth, backed by the likes of McDonald's, it appears.
Yes, and there's a really satanic brew going on there of corporations, royal families who hold out that they are defenders of one faith while appearing to practice others. Same with the Dutch royal family here, I have to say, which were also supposedly champions of constitutional Protestantism in the past and seem to have actually been patrons of a certain kind of banking. So there's a real stew there, and that slide you had with the 3 figures is a good example of why I don't have much truck with this Jews are the enemy business. Okay, Alinsky was there on the left. You can say that he was one of the Marxist-influenced Jews who very much had a pronounced idea of overturning the Goy social order. You read Pastor Richard Wurmbrand about this, Marx and Satan. But then you have in this middle a man of confused identity and contested birth and origin, Mr. Obama, and confused nationality even. And on the right, Prince Harry, who may or may not be the legitimate scion of a royal family which holds out to be the champion of all things British and constitutional. You can see what the common denominator is: confusion and disgruntlement with their own identity and that of the families and organisations they claim to represent. So this is where the really nasty stuff comes in, regardless of your ethnic and religious and philosophical standing in life. If you are dischuffed with your own identity and don't know which group you belong to and what their narrative is, you're going to involve yourself in destructive stuff. And evil, just simply speaking in human forms, evil is going to come tapping you on the shoulder and suggest, how about overturning this order which you're projecting your own uncertainty onto? That's what we have to tackle, finding out who we are again, so that we're no longer vulnerable to this stuff.
Alex, thank you for that. And I'll just add, it's I think the rule is it's by what people do that you start to identify what they are. The label always leads you into the wrong place, but if you actually look at their actions, what do they do? What does that tell us? Invariably, you can sort out right from wrong.
Okay. This on screen at the moment is Susan Dixon, who is the UK mission to the UN legal counsellor. And she was speaking at the UN yesterday. She said, "May I start by expressing the gratitude of the United Kingdom to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court for being here today with members of her team and for presenting to the Security Council her 14th report and update on the activities of her office on the situation in Libya. The United Kingdom fully supports the work of the Office of the Prosecutor and the ICC as a whole to bring to account those responsible for serious crimes of international concern in Libya and elsewhere. The situation in Libya remains extremely serious and a cause for grave concern. We fully support the Court's call for cooperation from all members of the Council, Libya and other states to provide information to facilitate the arrest and surrender of these men, I'll say who they are in a second, to the ICC to be tried for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Libya in 2011. Those responsible for war crimes and other serious crimes in Libya must not escape justice." Well, I'm very glad to hear her say that, although I disagree with her choice of candidates for this, because she has chosen Saif al-Islam Gaddafi and al-Tahami Mohammed Khalid as the two particular names that she feels should be in front of the ICC. But of course, they weren't responsible for the majority of the war crimes in Libya in 2011. This man was, and I think, Alex, I'd be interested in your view, I think that this man can now join Tony Blair with having this label put on his head. And I'm really glad to see that the British government believes that those responsible for war crimes and other serious crimes in Libya must not escape justice. Do you agree that perhaps David Cameron should be heading off to the ICC at this point?
Well, he does seem to have committed some indictable offences in my amateur judgment, and in many ways his foreign policy is kind of Blair Mark II. Don't get me wrong, I'm not exaggerating the point, but there is a certain sense in which Gordon Brown was a break. He's also an evil man in many ways, Brown. But with his son of the manse ideology, he, like Robin Cook, took a step back from this London-based meddling in other countries approach and took a more sanctimonious tone, Church of Scotland kind of tone. And when Cameron came in his coalition government, especially with Clegg at his side, as his sidekick, there seemed to be a return to this meddling in the Middle East and getting Gaddafi on side. A lot has come out openly. I can't say what else I know, but a lot has come out already just publicly about MI6 being used to bring Gaddafi in from the cold. And, you see the consequences. The best source on Libya eyewitness stuff from 2011 onwards are the elderly Texan couple called the Benghazi whistleblowers, who you can find some YouTube interviews with. Very compelling, persuasive stuff. And they got they won the trust of some of the tribes in the Cyrenaica part of the country, and talk about how mafiosi in the port city Misurata were co-opted to give Gaddafi his sticky end and to get their hands on the goodies. And then all these pets of Britain and America come in from the Gulf, the Qataris in particular, and literally make off with Libya's gold, which feeds back into the currency stuff we were talking about earlier. So that there is a criminal conveyor belt going on, and as usual, the nasties on the ground are just being used by well-placed criminal groups further up the Western system. Yes.
Well, in the meantime, fearing Russia, says Newsweek, Sweden orders $1 billion US missile system. So Sweden, one of Europe's few remaining neutral states, they say, will spend $1.3 billion on US missiles to shore up the defences in the face of Russia's military resurgence. I'm not clear which military resurgence that is, but anyway. The Swedish Armed Forces are in the process of reversing a series of military cuts and reintroducing compulsory military service, as in one of the several moves to counter an increasingly boisterous Russia under Vladimir Putin, they say. Well, that's interesting, but you have also noted that German 2040 wargaming foresees war in the East.
Yes, I've put details on screen, which I won't read out. People can freeze the screen. But basically, Der Spiegel has found out, because of a controlled leak, a deliberate leak, that the Bundeswehr, the motor of the new unified European Union military, is realizing that as America shuffles off the scene in Europe through being penniless and having other interests, and perhaps being less interested in interfering in the world, we hope, Germany will have to pop out from behind the rampart it's hidden from behind of 70 years past, and actually be a military power in its own right. And the scenarios that it's wargaming all have one common point, which is big bad Russia is going to be giving some of these countries in the buffer zone between Germany and Russia, the Central and Eastern European republics, it's going to be giving them the wrong idea that they can actually use what the document calls state capitalism, which again is the harnessing the people for production and infrastructure idea, which is death to the current overlords of Europe, the idea of having the people producing and making surpluses, because then you can't cream things off through inflation and other forms of theft. So, a static economy is needed for the current German elite, increasingly regarded as an unlawful elite, to hold power. And for that, they're going to use the unified European Union military, particularly stationing it in the east. The other thing going on in that document is the realization that the Western European countries will have no further appetite to fight Russia. They're too well informed. And it's going to require the jingoism that's being pumped through countries like Poland now to make them the shock troops, Henry Kissinger's dumb brutes taking orders, as it were. They're going to have to be the Eastern European nations.
Yes, and in the meantime, speaking of EU military unification, we've got a German documentary here, which you've said are selling Mogherini's strategy. And just to mention what it says here, it says, for a year and a half, renowned filmmaker Annalisa Piras has accompanied the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini. In 2015, Mogherini was commissioned to draw up a global strategy for foreign and security policy of the European Union, which she is now working on at a rapid pace, and talks about Operation Sophia and EU Cap Sahel, and it's describing this as being the background to the rethinking of the European Union. So more recognition elsewhere of what's actually going on here, and no coverage in the UK continues.
No, this is selling Mogherini to the continent. And although British journalists were used in this, if you listen carefully to the soundtrack, this is not for British consumption. Arte is a German, but with French arms to it as well, a German bien pensant kind of documentary channel. And here, Mogherini is allowed. It's because she's given privileged access to these journalists. She's allowing Arte to present her view of the world. And there's so many strings to this. We could talk about it a long time. But in brief, she's a Euro-communist, one of these generation from the 80s onwards who in their youth thought communism's great, but we can't be tied to the Soviet Union. It has to look like it's a native European movement. This comes out of Gladio as well. So there she is, the woman who in her youth posed with Yasser Arafat and so on and joined the Italian Communist Party as a teenager. And here we see her, as you often describe, Mike, hugging Jens Stoltenberg, giving him privileged access to Europe, the EU's thinking. But a picture emerges from this documentary. Read my tweets from in the below Twitter handle from yesterday if you want to see all the nasties who appear in the documentary as talking heads cheerleading for Mogherini. They're all very nasty characters indeed. I'm not saying that lightly. I know what I'm talking about. Some of them are out-and-out Satanists. But why are they all cheerleading her? What's the narrative? Well, Mogherini presents herself as basically a starry-eyed young woman who was put in that role because she was a starry-eyed young woman, and she has a burning desire to save the world. And she regards it as our job to save every last soul in the world, and that she sees that in purely material terms. And the dichotomy she builds up through the film, mostly speaking through her talking heads who are speaking on her behalf, is, look, this lot are always going to come here anyway. There's going to be famine, war, etc., which we know the West and Israel is creating at the moment. It's going to be driving these people towards Europe. Nasty Russia's going to be forcing people from the East. So we all have to receive them here. And rather than making them illegal and seeing them drown in heartrending ways in the Med, why not bring them in a controlled form? And the other end of that is Mogherini's civilian military cooperation, which for the first time since you spotted it, Mike, now is openly talked about. Mogherini and her cheerleaders, such as the LSE professor of government theory or whatever, public governance, who's the daughter of a Hungarian communist, as far as I'm aware, they all say, well, the thing to do is to train up our starry-eyed, again, quite a lot of young women, but civilian policing type figures, send them into these countries, hold their hands and tell them, well, come in legally and be our road sweepers. So it's an extension of communism's old wet dream, which is lots of cheap labour and a class which speaks in their name and gets very fat doing so, Mogherini's chums. So it will keep the communists and the bankers at the top of the pyramid and the people unproductive, driving down wages again. It's a kind of economic dumping, basically. It was a very, very eye-opening documentary if you know where to look. But the thing that clinched it for me is all the talking heads talking on her behalf are extremely wicked people.
And Alex, is it available at all with English subtitles?
I haven't seen an English version, so you'll have to read my tweets of yesterday to see what I'm gisting that the main talking heads are saying. But it's a series of dog whistle messages, basically. Africans are stupid, Russians are sinister, nationalism is nasty, join us in the Euro-communist adventure, and Mogherini will lead the way.
Good stuff. Thanks for that summary. Okay, quick ad.
Amazing.
Yes, quick ad. Tonight, Ian Crane will be in the studio. Only one programme tonight, which is an episode of Fracking Nightmare. That will be on at 7:30 this evening. So join us live for that. No Humanity this week. So what's next?
Well, we go into the real state of UK. I have to say, we've just learnt this morning that Melanie Shaw has been moved once again, so she's no longer at Eastwood Park. They've moved her on to HM Prison Style, which is Wilmslow, Cheshire.
So they're moving her further and further away from her home?
Well, let's not forget, this lady has been in 14 months in solitary confinement. She's been brutalised, and now we've got constant moves. And why do you do this with prisoners? It unsettles them, and vulnerable prisoners, this is mental disorientation. It's really funny that this is happening just at the time that we're hearing today that the child abuse inquiry will start with public elements in March 2019. So you might like to go into the Times and have a look at this, but it's taken this so long to set up. But March 2019, bearing in mind
that's another 18 months away.
Indeed it is. We are going to get this investigation underway.
So will it be finished by the end of the century?
No idea, but I think that they're going to keep Melanie Shaw in prison until this inquiry is over, because of course she is one of the vital witnesses and they want her out the way. Meanwhile, it's taken Guido Fawkes to point out that there's still no movement on the Vaz inquiry. You remember the video? Yeah. Rent boys, drugs. Well, that was so difficult for the Westminster investigation, the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. There's still no progress on this. So you can have a video, but it's just so difficult to get a verdict out. And if you don't know who's running the show at the moment, this is the lady Catherine Hudson. This is a Telegraph article going back a bit, but they were saying, we don't know what this woman's doing because we've had a look at the statistics, and she's only roughly looking at 1 in 10 of the complaints put through. And then, of course, Jack Straw and Sir Malcolm Rifkin, well, they didn't do anything wrong. They had to step down, but they didn't do anything wrong. That was all a big mistake. And she really can't get to grips with the Vaz inquiry. We did talk to them this morning, very polite lady, answered. We just asked how these commissioners are appointed. And basically, there was a review panel. At present, that review panel is Kevin Barron, Chair of the Committee on Standards, Sir Paul Beresford, Chair of the Administration Committee, Dr. Jane Martin, External Member, Philippa Helm, the Principal Clerk of the Table Office, and Chair of the panel. So this panel selects these people, but I don't know how the panel selected. And you know, this is the key, isn't it? Because let's bring this man back on screen. Tory whip said we covered up the abuse of small boys, so the MPs would do as we asked. So are we witnessing further cover-ups?
Right, Alex, just 30 seconds on this. Ronald Bernard has, was this the fourth part of his testimony? Sorry, is the word I'm trying to think of.
Yes, it is. DVM TV is the channel in small print at the bottom to go and find it. There's 2 versions, pure Dutch and subtitled in English. Subtitles leave something to be desired, but you get the gist. It's his passion that's important. Facing up to the critics who've said, are you just a scamster wanting another bank, and so on, and where's your past? Again, very convincing throughout. DVM TV stands for De Vrije Media, the free media. But in this interview, he reveals that he's got a second meaning for the term, which is the Dutch Vision Movement. He believes that the Netherlands, which has been the source of so much financial evil in the world, can actually be one of the places from which the solution comes. So do definitely watch that. Okay,
now Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary has issued a report called Peel. They do this every year. This is a 2017 report, and it's saying that in the report it's beginning to see examples of police in the UK prioritising demand in such a way that low priority and less urgent incidents can be left unresolved for long periods, and this is on the basis of underfunding. They say under austerity and under cutbacks, the requirements to prioritise have become more acute in recent years. Often forces are immediately assessing the threat, harm, and the vulnerability of the person calling. Sometimes they get it absolutely right, but sometimes this can be misapplied or poorly managed, and vulnerability can be missed. Now, this was carried out across the police forces in England and Wales between April and July this year. Of the 42 forces inspected, 10 were listed as requiring improvement on efficiency, and only 2 were listed as outstanding. Well, the report concludes that policing is becoming increasingly complex in terms of the types of crimes that the police have to deal with, and also the number of different organisations that they have to work with. So they're saying that the police have had to make and continue to have to make difficult decisions. But here's what it really means, Brian, isn't it? Significantly stressed police forces is their headline in their press release, need to continue to change. And this is all about I believe, and others may have a different view, but I believe that what's happening here is the deliberate underfunding of the police to force change, in inverted commas. Of course, we're not being told in the mainstream press what this change is leading to. UK Column has highlighted some of the documentation from the College of Policing and others about where this change is leading to, but it's not getting a broad audience.
It's not getting a broad audience, but what we're seeing is breakdown in the police. Where the phrase change is used, what is actually occurring is breakdown of the systems and the management within the police. Same thing happening in the NHS. This is organised collapse of policing.
But Alex, is the same thing going on the continent?
It is, Mike, and we'll keep this a very brief overview of quite a scandal in the German media, but all the main outlets have talked about it now. Die Welt, Die Zeit, Berliner Zeitung, Focus Magazine, not Tagesschau, but one of the others, mainstream ones as well, Tagesspiegel, that's the one. They're all pointing to a scandal at Berlin Police Academy, Ruhleben. This is for the Berlin City Police Force. It's not a national training college, but a large number of Arabs and Turks have been taken on under the moniker of diversity, but they have been specifically selected, it's becoming clear, for their criminality, because that's useful to white German criminals further up the system. Very much similar to what's happening in other countries across the continent now. And if you drill down a bit deeper and look at the following slide, you see that Detective Chief Superintendent Neuendorf says just because a police candidate comes from a criminal clan, known in the actual city where he's being trained, we're not going to discriminate against him. We evaluate on a case-by-case basis. And we'll take people with a minor criminal record into the police academy. This is not traditional European policing. And the actual police academy director, Jochen Zindberg, says, oh, these are young people. It's quite normal for some cadets to be bloody insolent. Rotzfrech, he says in German, which he could even translate more strongly, but at the very least, bloody insolent. He's quite prepared to accept this. It's come to a head because of a whistleblowing voicemail in which one of the cadets said, we are going to end up being beaten up here. There's cadets from these criminal fraternities fencing stolen goods, dealing drugs on campus, threatening white cadets with their revolvers. We're going to have a shootout on campus at some point. But this is all being engineered. And by whom? I think you just switched over one slide, but it's quite important to have it back, which is the lady on screen. This lady, Margarete Koppers, wanted the top slot at Berlin Police, and she told the Siegersäule, the homosexual magazine, that she only didn't get the top slot because she's a lesbian. In fact, she's got lots of corruption against her, allegations. And there, someone's dug up that in 2012 she said we're going to usurp the police and make it a social institution. And on the right, you have the similar thing going on in Amsterdam City Police here in the Netherlands, where Fatima Elatic was paid €250,000 at least, if not more, off the books to come up with confidential diversity advice, which has been sanitized and blacked out when it was requested under FRA legislation, in which it appears that she, like her German lesbian counterpart and like Common Purpose in the UK, was suggesting go for the minorities. And of course, that this is done in the name of diversity, but they're being over-promoted and over-recruited so that there can be a ramping up of criminality in the police force, is my reading of it, throughout Europe. And so that this cannot be quibbled with, because if you speak against it, you're against positive and affirmative action. And then we get to a point here at the end where German police are recruiting mafiosi, and a Jewish German law student here, Romai Shaker, says to the police, look, it only took me 5 minutes to find out that you have knowingly recruited into the police academy in Cologne Mohammed El-Zain, who is the nephew of a notorious Cologne crime boss. So all the signs are pointing to the fact, and Zindberg, the police academy chief in Berlin, said as much, we will knowingly recruit people from Arab and Turkish mafia clans in the name of diversity. So the fault is, again, not with Islam, is it? It's with the people who are doing this.
And we come on to policy, the people creating the policy to use what are often very vulnerable people that have come in from other places. We could have a big discussion on this. We're running out of time, but it's very interesting. The common purpose attack on society is not only happening in this country, it's happening in European countries. Okay, well, we'll end there. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. A lot of information there. We'll say to our audience, as we always do, it's not sitting and listening to what we're talking about, it's helping other people to see and listen to the material we're producing. So do help us to spread the word on what the UK Column News is doing. And we do need your financial support. If you're not a subscriber and you're now listening in and watching our news on a daily basis, perhaps you'd be kind enough to subscribe and help us keep doing what we're doing. Thanks very much for joining us. That's it. Bye-bye.